Leprechaun Lemonade is back at Raising Cane's for a limited time. Enjoy the same lemonade you love, just made green to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. So raise a glass to chicken fingers and toast to, well, toast. Happy St. Patrick's Day from Raising Cane's. One love.
Welcome to this week's Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin, Bob Marks, and Andy Cohen.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your hosts, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
On this week's show, we have a continuation of last week's show with international owners and breeders Gordon Banks and Marc Hanover, also owner-breeder Howard Perlmutter, and presiding judge Dan Kazmaier. We are here to discuss harness racing. Gordon, Marc, Howard, and Dan, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Gordon, you're the lead on this, so I'm turning it over to you.
Well, then we're definitely all in trouble. But I guess the summary is akin to giving you a feel for what happened last week, because many of you may not have heard that tape yet. But everything was revolved around a discussion as to what can be done to try to avoid the cliff that North American harness racing is right at. We've discussed international. We discussed a little bit of what's going on in New Zealand and Australia. They have a similar set of problems, although somewhat different in the specifics. But in terms of the future of harness racing, their problems are quite similar. I think it was the consensus of John Campbell and everybody else that was involved in the first show that there really is a major problem with harness racing, that if significant changes aren't undertaken, that the industry in 5 to 10 years will be drastically cut back, 5 or more tracks dying, purses much lower. There were some ideas that were put forth, but I don't want to prejudice everybody's feelings here by saying too much about what happened last week. So I think I'll throw it open to anything that anybody suggests that can address the real problem that racing in North America has, with one other point, that there are so many things one can say that could improve the quality of racing, and they're important, and they certainly can be brought up. But the really important question is, even if you do everything well, all those small points get fixed, how does one save racing? Because it's an industry that's owned by people that want its death. It's an industry that makes no money. There's not one profitable harness track in North America on a standalone horse racing basis. There's no real property ownership. Horse racing has lost control of its product. Its product nowadays is the live feed. The online betting accounts for 90% or more, and the racetracks get 3% or less from most of that betting, as opposed to the 20% or more that they used to get in the old days from on-track attendance. So the economics don't work anymore. The system is hard to change. You have enemies everywhere, and the question is, with that wonderful synopsis, what can we all do? What ideas are out there that can move things forward? So with that, please, everybody's thoughts.
So, Gordon, and as you said the other night,
okay, that's that's Howard talking.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Gordon, you made reference to many important points the other night. There seems to be a lot of everybody is congratulating each other on the $3 to $4 million handle, but at the 3% return because nobody's going to the track, it doesn't really mean very much. And the problem, unfortunately, is that we have a lot of medieval minds that are still functioning like it was the 80s, when there wasn't really nearly the type of competition that we had back then for today's gambling dollar. I mean, times are just so different, where we are getting crushed, and I mean crushed, by the every night gambler that is really into immediate gratification. And we haven't even come close to addressing that. And that's something that, in my humble opinion, if that is not addressed, then I just don't see us being able to meaningfully, move forward, whether we have the same amount of tracks, more tracks, less tracks. We must change the platform. We must change the model in which we are accessible to that everyday, every night, overnight type gambler. And I'll stop right now, and I certainly don't want to dominate this session, but I'd like to hear people's response to that concept.
Dan or Mark, I have comments, but I also don't want to monopolize, so I'd rather come in after you give your thoughts to that, because it's a valid point, and if we need to fix our product on the track, and we need to fix our product from a wagering perspective. Any ideas or thoughts to what Howard said?
Hey, Danny, now you've been active as a presiding judge at Harris and Dover, and I think Rosecroft. What are your thoughts on it? You see the attendance, you see the people there, but what do you think?
Well, there's a lot of problems, of course. Decoupling is something that needs to be stopped somehow by maybe a lawyer or something, because they wouldn't have a license. The casinos would not have a license without horse racing, but they want to decouple it. But a couple of things that really hurt harness racing and thoroughbred and quarter horses are the drug problems. That needs to be stopped. You would think that the Gorell had 29 people indicted, you think that the drugs would stop. But no, they didn't. You've got the ADB Pubanaca positives in Delaware. You got these the quarter horses in $3 million races. 4 or 5 horses tested positive for a Class 1. I mean, that's got to stop. The problem with commissions and the commissioners they're afraid of lawyers. The lawyer gets a fentanyl positive. If the lawyer takes a fentanyl positive to the commission and says it's contamination, well, they fold. It's one driver trainer we gave a $10,000 fine and a year suspension for fentanyl positive, was reduced to $1,000 in 10 days. Now, if you can't protect the innocent unless you prosecute the guilty, and that's not happening. That doesn't help. Your 1 in 9 shots at Dover Downs, there were probably 5 or 6 1 in 9 shots every night in 15 races. Who's going to bet on 1 in 9 shots? You got to change the conditions so there's no 1 in 9 shots. Maybe winners over instead of non-winners of 1 or 2, or non-winners of 5, or between 5 and 6 races, whatever. 1 in 9 shots. Not good. The other thing is, I don't know how we can stop it, but if you don't advertise, if you don't promote your business, you're going to die. And that's what's happened. The casinos don't want to do that with harness racing. They don't want to waste the money. Harris was doing it. Harris up at Chester. They were 5 years, 6 years ago, and they got a good crowd, but then they stopped advertising and they stopped promotions. So if you don't, we got to continue to somehow bring back harness racing by advertising, maybe on somehow. I'm not an advertising guy, but these are the problems.
I think, this is Gordon, I think that advertising can get people in the door. Advertising can get people to wager and watch harness racing. But if the product isn't good and if it's not well presented, nobody's going to come back a second time. And I think that harness racing hasn't worked on its product yet. The races are boring. As you said, there are too many 1 to 9 shots.
Right.
The drug issue is always there. It's there for every breed. That's just a perennial problem. I had a really interesting conversation with one of the people who was on the show last week, Robert Famularo, in New Zealand, because they're light years ahead of us when it comes to gaming ability, and they offer what they call multi-bets. So on any fixed odds, that's another point, by the way, fixed odds racing is necessary, but on any fixed odds race anywhere in the world or any fixed odds sporting event, Somebody in New Zealand can go online or at a track and bet whatever combination they want. It could be 2, 4, 5 events. You could bet $5, and if everything would hit, it's basically a parlay. They don't call it a parlay. It's only through fixed odds. Because if it's through the tote system, by the time you hit the third leg, you're getting no money back. But on the fixed odds system, it does work. And they've had people win $800,000 on a $10 bet. You can have all sorts of things that are done to make racing interesting and gambling interesting that we're not doing. And there's no talk of it. There's people don't know it. I think, Freddie may have a show one of these days with Robert to introduce people in this country to what's being done there. But it's really revolutionary, and it makes it really exciting for people who don't want to bet a lot but can win a lot, which, after all, is what distinguishes potentially racing from the casinos and other places.
And Gordon, this is it's Howard again. And what Gordon said the other night is that a meaningful approach, as decoupling is going to become this, it's inevitable that decoupling will occur. Excellent chance. 3 years in Florida, you're going to have the decoupling of Gulfstream, Tampa, and if it's going to happen down there, it's going to happen up in the Northeast corridor. Everybody knows it. It's not a matter of how, it's a matter of when. So we just have to think about presenting our product differently within the dominant mobile app format. And Gordon, we were talking about this last night. Whether it's FanDuel, Ladbrokes, Betfair, things of that nature. But it was my idea that if we could use our product and kind of form a conglomerate with other major seasonal events, we may be able to derive very large global betting pools. Because it may be a way of organically directing people to kind of learn about our sport. Imagine being alive in a pick 8 or a pick 10 for $25 to $50 million, just to be hypothetical. I think that could create some very meaningful possibilities.
It would be exciting. I mean, after all, in France, the Sunday lottery is based on the finish of a certain race at Vincennes in the French racing every week, called the Tiercé. You have the V75 in Sweden. You have huge payoffs because of that. You could do it in the States, too. The difficulty is that there seems no will to do it. Clay Horner, in last week's show, brought up an idea similar in that he feels that the big tracks, in terms of handle in the States, have to work together in some sort of time sequence network. So everything's organized, well presented, and that those major tracks have to have their own network for video and also for gambling, so that all the VIG, all the 15 to 20% income that the tracks used to get, that they gave away for online, that they're going to get that back by taking it away from the platform companies and doing it themselves. And I think there's a consensus on the part of everyone in last week's show, and I think most people that think about it, that that's really the only solution, to have an industry that can be profitable on a standalone basis in the future.
Gordon, I really agree with what Clay has to say along that premise. And I think you guys were also talking about, in the inevitability of decoupling, that maybe through the legislation, the legislative bodies, our group, and casinos, maybe some type of deal could be made over a 6 to 8 year plan where casinos would be able to pay us a certain amount to get the decoupling out of the way, but we could use that money to find a cheaper piece of land, build a new facility, but to also invest in some of these online apps so that we can always have our name there, our product there to be included in these big pool events. I really think that long term it's going to be a necessity, not a luxury.
I think so. I think everybody last week thought that too. The difficulty John Campbell brought up a lot, quite often. That his experience, and Dan would be able to comment on it, but his experience in the industry is that it's almost impossible to get everybody on the same wavelength. And one of the things I'm hoping that these shows achieve is getting people in the industry who might listen to understand that what they're not hearing is reality. They're not hearing from the USTA. They're not hearing from the Standardbred Breeders and Owners Association's chairs. They're not hearing from people that have nice jobs today how in 5 to 6 years the industry will be decimated with decoupling. They think that the gravy train's going to continue, that the casinos are going to have to give us money. It's not going to happen. If Gulfstream can get decoupled, anybody can get decoupled. And harness racing has thought for a long time that the argument that there are 40,000 downstream jobs, that somehow protects us. It doesn't. Because what's going to happen is that when a state or a casino wants to get rid of harness racing, they're going to replace it with something that has an argument about the fact that when the new industry is created, it's going to have far more jobs than what harness racing had, and probably pay a higher tax base. So it's going to happen, and the drivers, the trainers, the owners, the people every day in this business, they have to understand that there has to be unity, that there has to be a recognition that the handout from government and from casinos will not continue, and that we had better get out front of it, work with them, make it a win-win-win for everybody. Let the casinos get the objective they want. Let the government get the objective they want, as long as harness racing gets the objective that it wants. And that means a completely new business plan, a completely new direction. But if everybody's working together, one can get it done. But if everybody's rowing in a different direction, it's hopeless.
Yeah, Gordon, Freddie here. Yeah, that is just so true. But, one of the other things now is not just harness racing that's being threatened, it's thoroughbred racing. And I didn't see that coming. I thought they would be a few more years behind us, but they're right there now too of being threatened for extinction. And so we do have to work with the thoroughbreds. We have to work with them.
I agree with that, but Freddie, the reason that you have the problem at Gulfstream, the potential problem at Santa Anita, and the problems we have in harness racing all connect to real estate.
Yeah, 100%.
You cannot expect high value real estate currently owned by casinos to be utilized for racing, which loses money. It's a complete waste of an asset, and it just cannot continue. And what you said too about you working with the thoroughbreds, the breeds should be working with each other. In a lot of racing in Europe, you go to a Sunday racetrack, they'll have 3 thoroughbred races, 3 jump races, and they'll have 3 or 4 harness races, and everybody works together. And it's one tent, whether one likes it or not.
Danny, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, well, I agree with trying to make this betting program a little bit better, like having, as you mentioned, someone mentioned the other day about 12 to 14 entries in a race, and the drivers don't want to do that. Well, they got to man up to it. I think 14 horses in one race would actually bring in the bettors, would help get rid of the 1 in 9 shots. And you do it with other tracks on a pick 8 or something like that, you're going to get $1 million payout.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. And what it means, though, is that you have to change your racing. They race down under and in Europe many times with 16, 18, 20 horses. But the races are much longer distance, and the racing style is different, and the purses have to align so that the drivers and the owners can find a way to make money from the situation. But those things can all be done. They've been done in other parts of the world. And as you said, it would make the races much more interesting, and the potential jackpot's huge.
Hey, Mark, I see you trying to jump in here.
Well, I also see one thing I think one has to address in the industry is one has to get rid, to a certain extent, of this proliferation of overdoing a bet, like we have on the card that might have 10 trifectas or superfectas. That just ends up killing the betting pool. It's better, as they try to do in Europe, and maybe also a little bit down under, concentrate the multi-bets on one or two events per race card.
Yeah, Mark, the multi-bet, it's new even to Mark and I, who do a lot down under. But I had it explained to me today in detail. And the multi-bet is available at any time, but for any race. If I want to if I think Leap of Fame is going to win the Miracle Mile in 3 weeks, I can bet that, and I can bet 5 other races. I could bet a soccer game. I could bet another horse to come in the top 3, and I could do it for, let's say, $10. And it's a multiplier, and it can be done, as I said, with no problem. And apparently now it is by far the most popular and biggest bet that there is down under, in conjunction with the fixed odds. You can't have it without the fixed odds. And the fixed odds took over 80 to 90% of the wagering. The pari-mutuel system is dead down under. People want fixed odds. They want to have the choice of they want to know that when they make a bet, what odds they're going to get. Here in the States, even at the Meadowlands, you bet with a minute left, the horse is 6-1. The race starts, it's 5-1, and then you see it flashing when the horse is flying by the field in the stretch, and it's 1-2. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely. Jeez. Well, racing is definitely boring right now. I mean, the favorite leads, he gets a hold, he pulls out, and goes to the top. Nobody pressures. There's no pressure at all. And people are tired of that. It's got to be changed.
It's why one has to figure out how to change the product before we try to market it. Because if you market it now, it won't succeed.
Totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to fix the product and then market it. But the product has to be fixed. And we have so many avenues that is spread here by. We have so many different areas of the sport that we have to fix. It's just like, we're a sport that runs on spokes in a wheel, and we're like racing on like 4 spokes out of 50. I mean, so we have to fix all those other spokes to basically put out a good product.
Yeah, and the thing that's really frightening is that our sport is doing nothing to convince casinos or the government that there will ever be a profitable future. There can't be. That's the problem. And what we have to do is completely redesign the business so that we can go to the casinos and the government and give them a win-win-win where 8 years down the road, everybody succeeds because everybody can make more money from it. But there has to be that trust in a business plan that makes sense. Right now, there's no business plan that makes sense for horse racing. It's just praying that everything will continue.
But hey, Gordon, Fred here. I do want to add to this conversation here that, on last week's show, we agreed to put a business plan together, and we have Clay Horner leading on that, along with Johnny Campbell, you, myself, and we're looking to put a business plan together.
We're hoping to. We're hoping to. Yeah, I'm certainly willing. I hope Clay is, and Howard, I think, hopefully could help, and Mark and others. It has to be. It has to make sense,
right.
and it has to. In my view, first one has to go to the casino companies, the state legislatures, and the government, and see what their feedback is, and if one can structure something that all of them can accept that looks like it would be good for harness racing, then one has to come back to harness racing and to our sort of split industry and see if we can get a consensus behind that or with some modification, something that would work. And that's our future, and I think all of us are willing to do what we can to help effectuate that. So a business plan is the first step.
Yeah, Fred here again, absolutely.
So, Freddie, Gordon, it's Howard again. I have to ask you straight up, and I know this is the first time I've had, the privilege of being able to talk with you guys, but I'm going to just be assertive here, and I'm going to ask yourself to kind of put it out there. And the same with you, Mark and Dan. It's good to be speaking with you. May I ask you guys quite candidly, where do you guys see the greatest resistance coming from with the establishment? Where do you foresee the greatest resistance coming towards a new wave business plan? I'd like to hear your guys' opinions on that.
I would tend, this is Mark, I would tend to say a lot of it is coming from the grassroots, but also even higher up. There's nobody that's willing to take a position of proposing something and make it work. But I fully agree with you. If we don't get a plan in shape for something that's starting to look like one within the next year, we have a very short time frame. I don't even know if 1 year is okay. You really want something right now when the season is starting to swing into full gear.
I agree with that statement. I agree with that 100%.
Right.
Howard,
I can tell you one thing from personal experience. It is crucial, absolutely crucial, that we get business people in there. They don't have to be connoisseurs and lovers of horses. It's actually better if they're not, because they have common business sense and can put it.
I agree again. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, when IBM had a disaster and they needed to get it fixed, they didn't go to an engineer. They went to a turnaround specialist. And you don't need a horseman to get racing out of this mess. In fact, it's, as Mark says, pretty likely that's not the way to go. I think that, to answer your question, Howard, I think the biggest problem is, I don't like to get too personal, but I think the USGA is the most obvious starting point.
I'm going to second that. I'm going to go on record as saying I see the USGA one of the greatest resistant forces towards what we're trying to do. Because
all they should be doing is documentation.
Let's call it for what it is, guys. Let's call it for what it is. I would even go on to say that the reason why we're in this situation right now is because of just the preponderance of staying with the status quo, taking the path of least resistance, and thinking, as Gordon said, that this gravy train is going to last forever, and it's clearly not. And things are not okay. So
I'm lucky that it's lasted as long as it has.
Yeah, this is Fred here. I think on last week's show, I think we identified what one of the major obstacles are, and what the resistance is coming from, along with the USTA. It's the horsemen's associations. We have to, they're constantly in disagreement on moving the sport forward.
But part of that's because you have leadership that's comfortable, happy with the way that things are with their job. I mean, you have the USTA committing $1.5 million to fighting HISA. And I'm not saying that HISA is good or HISA is bad. They're good people on both sides. But I really have a hard time understanding how anyone in this industry is supporting the expense of $1.5 million to fight something that is already being fought. Whether the USGA was involved in the lawsuit in any significant way or not, the same lawsuit would have been brought. The same lawsuit would have gone to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court's going to listen to it. You have multiple states suing. You have multiple plaintiffs and racetracks. There was absolutely nothing new that harness racing could possibly add to the situation. And you have a declining industry. You need the $1.5 million. And what happens? It's being spent on an issue that was unnecessary. Again, not right or wrong. Just it doesn't matter whether you're for Heiser or against it. It was just an insane expenditure, and those are the kind of things that are being done instead of the USGA looking at the strategic problems that racing has and trying to coalesce the right position, instead of actively trying to save the horsemen in Florida when they were losing Pompano, instead of actively and publicly, because I don't want to say that I don't know what they did. All I know is nothing was public, and they've had no success. But instead of having some success and publicly coming up with an intelligent response in Florida and in New Jersey, they're just there. They don't do anything. They're worrying about Heiser. That leadership is a big block. And if the best people in this industry put together an intelligent plan, the USGA is most likely to try to block it, to try to protect their jobs and their power base. And the heads of the local SPOAs, they may do the same thing. That's a real problem. But you have to be able to overcome it. And I think one can overcome it if one can present a package that's accepted by everybody else. You know, if the casinos and the states and the governors accept a 5 to 10 year program that makes sense to them, and we can present making sense to harness racing, I believe in the goodwill of most of the people in the industry, and I believe in the fact that the right people pushing it and supporting it can get it through, even though it would be a really tough fight.
Right. This is Dan. Years ago, I wrote an article about joining Heiser. When it first came out, it was a government-approved situation, and what we should have done was enter Heiser at that time, and got rules that would benefit harness racing. You got quarter horses, you got thoroughbreds, you got harness racing. They all are different breeds. They all needed their own rules. And if that didn't happen, then get out of it and sue. But at that time, they should have entered it. The USDA should have gotten in. Horsemen should have gotten in there. That's my opinion.
It's another reason, Dan. It's another reason that they shouldn't have sued, because they could have made clear their opposition. But if they didn't sue, they would have been accepted as a party for all the negotiations. Once they sued, the lawyers for Heiser never would allow harness racing to participate. So Not only was the suit unnecessary, but it also blocked us from negotiating and being in the room where the power was, and that was a very imprudent position.
Yeah, Fred here. Gordon, you were part of those early negotiations with Heiser before it was formed, and so you know all about that, as I do. We were basically trying to keep our sport with a lifeline to the Heiser, as we thought it was going to be passed as a law.
Yeah, Andy Cohen was very active in that, and others,
well, we can say who the others were. John Campbell, we had Jeff Doral, we had Ron Burke, we had Tony Alagna, Brian Brown. We had a lot of Linda Toscano. We had a lot of the top people in the sport trying to keep that lifeline open.
Yeah, nobody was committed to a decision, but everybody wanted to be able to hear and participate.
Steve Stewart. Can't forget Steve Stewart.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
what other ideas, Howard? Do you have other ideas?
No, I was just focusing in on, and I may be a little early on, just trying to, come up with putting our product that will be able to be bet, whether it's inter-race, different parts of a race, things that would really attract bettors that would not normally be, willing to consider even betting on our product. And again, not to be repetitive, the only way I could see that happening is that if we could get our product online with a group of maybe 8 or 9 other major seasonal events that could attract big pools. And it could be just within America. It could be on an international basis. I think the possibilities are really there, because Gordon, and I told you this the other night, even and we spoke about this, even if we were able to get relocated to our own property, we would still have to be able to organically attract new blood. And that's something that has to happen. And okay, you want to talk about ways of helping our product, not having short fields, not having, you're talking about, with the modified bikes and things of that nature, and the leaning back and making it harder for closers to come in. What Freddie's probably thinking about, back to the old Roosevelt days, 70s and 80s, the speed bias there wasn't really that type of speed bias the way it is now. There was, you could still get those numbers home from post 6, 7, and 8 and come up with big exactas and trifectas. And as you guys have noticed, it's just few and far between. So I think to make the improvements to our game, I don't think it's that difficult with some reasonable minds, but I think what could be more challenging is putting our product out there that's going to be amenable to be included in big-ticket gambling items. That could raise big pools.
Well, I think the industry needs to attract the right people to try to put that deal together with the right connections. That's very much a connections game.
That's right.
I heard the other day that NASCAR is going to get pari-mutuel betting. I don't know.
Well, I think they have it. I think they have it because a friend of mine was telling me that he was betting live on the Daytona 500 in race, and that he actually bet on 5 drivers, one of which was Johnson was 70-1 and finished third, and the winner was 15-1. But he was telling me that he spent the whole afternoon watching it and betting while the race was going on. So I don't know how he did it, but it may well be it already exists.
I had one of my old owners sponsor a car in the Indy 500 years ago, and he was pissed as hell afterwards because his car finished 4th in the race, and the driver drove the car so perfectly that he never got a call in the race, which he got zero publicity for. It cost him $300,000 to sponsor that car back then.
Okay, I'm not going to sponsor a car.
How you want to drive one?
But there have to. The other thing is, if you look at Down Under and you look at Europe and look at the thoroughbreds in the States, there's also a lot you can do by just bringing in celebrities, and when harness racing has to consider its name. I'm sure there are a lot of people who believe in the name, and I'm not desperately against it. But thoroughbred racing has one connotation. Harness racing or standardbred racing sort of has a different connotation. And I think it's something that harness racing people are somewhat proud of. But in the modern world, you want to put on a show. And you want to people watch the Kentucky Derby or go to it because they want to be part of the scene. They want to see the celebrities. They want to be immersed in it. That's not the case at the Hambletonian. That's not the case at harness racing's big events, not even the Jug. The Jug is fun. But why can't harness racing get some celebrities to go? If you have to pay them a little bit to go, that's okay. But get celebrities in there, and why not emulate some of the things that work in thoroughbred racing? Look at the Breeders' Crown in thoroughbred racing. There are a whole series of qualifying races. They don't have eliminations. They don't have. They don't do it the way we do it. I don't really understand why we don't do it the same way as they do it. Have points that you get in a series of lead-up races. That's how they do it, by the way, in Australia too for the big races. And you don't need eliminations. You have 7 or 8 or 9 qualifying races, and they're not they're stake races, but you get points for. And the 10 most points would get into the Breeders' Crown final, and I think it makes for a better show in thoroughbred racing. Why not try it in our racing? But that's just one idea. But there's so many. I think it's so frustrating that there's no vehicle for Howard or myself or anybody else to really come up with or suggest ideas.
Well,
Danny, are you trying to talk?
I'm trying to talk to myself. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be done and need to be done quickly. There's no question. But we need to change what we're doing now. We can't have this single file racing. It's boring. You go to the track and there might be 10 people watching the races. That's it.
And Dan, that's also why, Dan, at the end of the day, there will be decoupling. If you had a full grandstand, it would be different. But when you're having nobody at racetracks, at some point in time, they just have to cut. They have to cut the bleed, and they have to put the money to the police and to firemen and to homeless people and to other causes, and it has to happen.
Yeah, the new governor in Delaware is going to be looking at that money.
This is Mark. What you're saying once again is you need to find one person who can just start ramrodding through some of the stuff. Like, get rid of this nonsense that it can't come more than 8 in the race, maybe 9 or 10 at the Meadowlands. And it's got to be done quickly but I know the breeders cause problems, the drivers cause problems, the owners. There's no God-given rule that every owner should have the horse's nose on the front line. That's how we do it. Yeah, I mean, look, you have like the Prix can easily have 25, 30 horses. You have the Grand National in England has 45, 50 horses.
Right.
Yeah. Steeplechase. Yeah.
And they'll get and they'll get the results from it.
People want to see a show,
I know
why can't somebody, if everybody is behind us like Corral and other people, that Corral still has the power. He can start writing 12, 14 horse races. Maybe have to put in a little bit more money to support them, but you're definitely going to start seeing reaction because gamblers, they smell an opportunity.
Right.
But the drivers will stop it, and the trainers will press it, and the problem is that if there's anything from this show and last week's show that one really needs to impress on people in this industry is that they need to think for themselves. They shouldn't be led by anybody, not by the USTA, not by an SBOA chair, not by us. They have to think for themselves, and they have to recognize that all these new ideas have to be tried. If they don't work, they don't work. But what we have doesn't work, and they need to understand that and what the consequence will be.
Fred here, Gordon, I agree with you 100%.
I hope that we can have some impact in trying to get movement, because right now there is no movement. And Clay and John Campbell and Howard and all of us, we're here and we're talking about these things because we love harness racing. We care about harness racing. Most of us have had hopefully successful careers outside of harness racing and to some extent in harness racing. And we want to see the industry succeed and come back to what it was. And we've all seen businesses, normal businesses that succeed and that fail. And sadly, harness racing today exhibits all the indicia of a business that's ready to completely disappear. And that's sad.
Yeah, and we don't want that to happen. We want this sport to continue forever.
Yeah, and I don't know, I really wish that enough people hear these shows and that they respond. They could respond to you, Freddie, care of your show. They could respond in some way and with opposing concerns or perspectives. And I know from conversations with you, Fred, that over the years you've wanted to have open-minded, honest shows with the USGA management, with John Simpson, with Feraldo, with people on both sides, and they've never wanted to do that.
Right.
Because there's never been any desire to have an honest discussion and to present to the people in the industry two sides of an issue. The USGA website won't even publish any article that doesn't suit their purpose. This is an industry that's completely controlled from the top, and that leadership has led us to a cliff. And at some point, we all have to say that's enough and make a change and have the courage to make a change.
Yep, and the membership needs to know what's going on exactly, and they don't know. But well, Danny, I think you could probably say, when you're training horses, as a trainer, you get sort of locked up into your own stable. You don't even know what's going on around in the world.
Well, that's true. In fact, I might open up a public stable if we can get this thing going. But still, anyway, that, we need to get the ball rolling somehow. And I don't know who we can get to step in and step up and get this going. But if anybody has anybody in mind, then they need to be contacted.
Well, I think Freddie's doing everything he can, and I think it requires a first step of a group of people willing to put together a business plan that creates a new vision. And I think hopefully we can find those people, because it could even be one person, it doesn't matter. And then you submit it in draft form to 5 or 6 others, and it'll be modified and changes will be made. But one needs a new, effective, intelligent business plan. Number one.
I think we got the right people to do that, and there's Fred again. And the thoroughbreds have done all the work for us. They've done all the market research. They've done all the surveys, and all we have to do is take a look at what they've done, and they basically adjust it to the harness racing sport. I've read some of their stuff, and they basically, going back, I guess about 10 years ago, the McKinsey report basically did a report, and they basically said, well, you guys don't have enough time on TV. You only have like 50 shows or whatever per year. Well, now, following the McKinsey report, they now have 900 shows per year that they're basically promoting. And it wasn't to basically bring in new fans. It was for their old fans, because they found that the people over 50 were watching more TV than the younger generation. So they basically designed the TV to keep their fan base going. And they found that it increased their handles and it increased their attendance at the tracks in those areas. Those are some of the things that I found out from working with the thoroughbreds.
Well, there's a lot to learn on both sides. What do you say, Howard? Any other ideas?
I'm sorry, and this is Howard, but Fred, based on what you said, with the TVs and things like that, can we all agree that we live in a handheld phone, mobile, sporting bet app age? Can we agree to that?
Unfortunately, yeah.
I'm just asking your objective opinion, yes or no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm just saying that needs to be one of our concentrated platforms in which to advance if we're going to have any shot at all. Because those days of going to the track.
Absolutely, 100%, Howard, 100%.
And I have some ideas that, in other words, let me ask you guys this. I mean, if one asked you like the top sporting events of the year, you would think of, let's say, and I know the Olympic Games are once every 4 years. You'd say the Super Bowl, Wimbledon, Tour de France, Rugby World Cup, NBA Finals. Yeah, I don't see why we cannot have, let's say, just hypothetical, a Borgata in the same column as, let's say, March Madness, Super Bowl, NBA Finals, and the Masters. We could create pick eights, let's say, to occur in spring, summer, fall. We could coming up with a seasonal format is not that difficult. And I just think if we could do that and leverage the mobile sports app format, I think that we could go a long way.
Well, here's some ideas, and there's Fred again. These are some ideas from the past. The Triple Crowns and Thoroughbreds are very big. But guess what? We have 2 Triple Crowns. We have a Triple Crown for pacers and for trotters. We could reorganize those races and make them into a better and bigger event. We also have the international trot that they're doing at Yonkers. We have the American Trotting Championship, followed by the international, and then put a Challenge Cup, and we got a 3-race series there. Those are some of the things that can be done.
Great idea.
Yeah,
and one more thing.
I think.
Go Howard, real quickly. I don't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
One more thing.
Go ahead.
My wife Sarah just came up with a very good idea in terms of leverage, and if we could get Portnoy or some of his think tanks from Barstool Sports in to help us apply that type of format, again, I think it's something to just really consider.
Yeah, again, I think that's a matter of connections. But
I think it can be done. I think it
Clay
can be
was
done.
Clay was on I think a similar wavelength to you, Howard. Both of you are suggesting, which I think is right, that harness racing needs to be able to put on a grand show. And if it's a grand enough show, it can become a significant part of what you're talking about. And part of that was Clay thinking that you have to unify the 4 major tracks, like Woodbine, Meadowlands, Kentucky, maybe Ohio. And but you have to do something along that. It's just not easy, though, if you have I would have said it would take an incredibly fantastic 5 to 10 year plan to get any single race in harness racing to be at a level anywhere near any of the things you talked about. But it can be done because it's done in Europe. The major race in France, the major race in Sweden, they're world events. They're world events. No reason you can't have it here.
That's correct. I thought one of the great how do I put this? One of the races that they used to have was the North American Series, and the horses went from track to track, the same horses, and that brought some interest into this track.
Remember,
like
Mark, we won it with Raging Yankee.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Hey, Danny, Danny, was that called the Can-Am series?
I don't think it was a Can-Am. There was a Can-Am, yes, but I think there was
It followed it. It started the way Dan said, as a North American. I think then they switched it to the Can-Am, and it was a little changed.
Very good.
It was a great series.
Can-Am might have a different meaning to it today.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that I remember from when I was younger, I remember the excitement that there was when Aldo de Vivier came here from France and raced the great trotter, the huge trotter, and raced at the Meadowlands. And I think that America has lost the international aspect of everything. It's too bad that the international is at Yonkers because it doesn't get any coverage, and it's the wrong time of the year. So it's sort of a lost event. But you have the greatest pacer in the world right now.
Gordon.
I agree with you.
Gordon, your point is well taken. Everything you're saying is correct, but with proper grouping and the collaboration of other seasonal events, it could, we could leverage that with other seasonal events, just like we could leverage, let's say, celebrities like Aaron Judge and Post Malone wearing the Siegelman stable hats. We're not leveraging those types of dynamics while we really have the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. And look, the greatest pacer in the world right now is Leap of Faith in Australia. Get him over here. I mean, it happens that one of the wealthiest men in the world owns him, so it's not exactly a monetary issue. But get the right stars here. Create that big international race. Do something that's really able to get what Howard wants, which is significant coverage.
Right. Something like that should be televised too.
Absolutely. National and international television. International. The Australians would cover it. Bring in the British champion. Look at all the Irish horses that are doing well in the States now. Have a little creativity. Put together a race. And I know Jeff could do it. I know Jeff is creative. I know he's losing money in the Meadowlands and he doesn't want to put more money in. But my God, there are events that you could put together that would be spectacular. that would get a full crowd, that would get TV coverage, that would get press coverage, not just here, but internationally.
I wish to thank everyone for being on the show, and don't go away, because once I stop the recording, I do want to talk to everyone afterwards.
No problem, Freddie.
Thanks, Freddie.
Howard, Gordy, Dan, and Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Nice show, guys. Now let's go to Andy.
I'm going to go back a little bit in the next Keeping Pace column to talk a little bit more about that New York Times piece, a little bit more about the USTA's reaction to it, which was just posted a couple of days ago. Also going to take a look at the sort of legal defense fund that operates under the federal racing integrity law that's actually helping trainers who have been accused of positives defend themselves. Back to you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks so much, Andy.
That's a wrap for this week's show. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to listen again next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show